I still remember the exact words she whispered. "Don't embarrass us today." Her voice was low, but sharp, slicing through the air like a cold breeze. I was 17, standing in front of the polished mirror in our living room, adjusting the collar of a suit that didn't quite fit. My mom stood behind me, arms crossed, face stiff with the same tension that lived permanently in our house. Her eyes met mine in the mirror. She didn't smile. It was my sister's graduation. Amy, the golden child, class valedictorian, lead in the school musical, head of the student council. Everything she touched seemed to shine. And today, she'd be giving a speech in front of hundreds at the auditorium of Jefferson High in Cleveland, Ohio. The whole family was going to be there. Our aunts, uncles, cousins, my mom's co-workers from the real estate office. Even Pastor Morris from church had been invited. All eyes would be on Amy. But somehow, Mom still felt the need to warn me. It wasn't like I had a history of causing scenes. I mostly stayed quiet, keeping to myself, walking in Amy's shadow. But Mom had a way of turning silence into offense. If I looked bored, it was disrespectful. If I smiled at the wrong time, it was immature. And if I dared to speak well, that was just inviting disaster. So when she whispered those words, I didn't respond. I nodded slightly, adjusted my tie again, and got into the car with my dad, my mom, and my younger brother, Jacob. Amy had already left earlier with her friends. The school auditorium was packed. Rows of metal chairs lined the floor, and people were fanning themselves with programs. The air buzzed with the mix of excitement and heat. We sat near the front, a few rows from the stage. I could see Amy backstage, in her cap and gown, standing with her friends, all of them glowing with that mix of nerves and pride. The ceremony started like any other. The principal gave a welcome speech. A few awards were handed out. Names were called, and students walked across the stage to grab their diplomas. Every so often, parents would yell out a name or clap too loud, and Mom would flinch like it physically pained her. Then it was time for the valedictorian speech. Amy walked up to the podium, smiling like she was born to be up there. Everyone clapped. Cameras flashed. She cleared her throat and began. "Good evening, family, friends, teachers, and fellow graduates." Her voice rang clear and confident. She talked about challenges, dreams, late-night studying, and the future ahead. She thanked her teachers. She thanked her friends. Then, she thanked our parents. They always supported me, especially my mom, who never let me forget the importance of ambition. Mom smiled. I could see her soak in the praise like sunlight. Dad clapped quietly. Jacob stared at the ceiling, bored. I just watched. Amy ended with a quote from Maya Angelou, and the whole room stood to applaud. A standing ovation. She stepped down, glowing, walking back to her seat. Mom's hand squeezed my knee. Too tight. After the ceremony, there was a small reception in the school gym. Tables with punch and cookies. People standing in circles, chatting, taking pictures. Amy was surrounded by friends and teachers and people we barely knew. Everyone wanted a photo with her. She was gracious, polite, like a celebrity who still remembered where she came from. I stood near the wall with a paper cup in my hand, watching. Then came the announcement. "We'd like to invite family members to say a few words if they'd like. This is a time to celebrate not only our graduates, but those who supported them along the way." Mom turned to me. "Don't even think about it," she said under her breath. I wasn't planning on it. I hadn't prepared anything. I didn't even like speaking in class, let alone in front of a crowd. But something about the way she said it, so cold, so certain I'd mess it up, lit something in me. Before I could talk myself out of it, I walked toward the mic. There were maybe 50 people in the room. Parents, students, teachers, all still buzzing from the ceremony. The moment I reached the podium, the chatter died down. Amy turned and saw me. Mom stiffened. I cleared my throat. "Hi, I'm Amy's brother." A few polite smiles, some whispers. I wasn't planning on saying anything. Honestly, I was told not to. A few people chuckled. I glanced at Mom. Her jaw was tight, her eyes hard, But I guess I realized something tonight. That maybe it's time I do say something. Because while Amy's up here shining and she absolutely deserves to, there's a lot that happened behind the scenes. Stuff not everyone knows. The room went still. And I don't mean to take anything away from her moment. I love her. I'm proud of her. But I think people should know what it took for her to get here. What it took for all of us. Amy was staring at me now. So was Mom. Her smile had disappeared. I remember nights when she'd cry in her room because the pressure was too much. The time she fainted from not eating enough because she was so stressed. The way she'd rehearse speeches until her voice cracked. But the thing is, no one ever let her say no. No one ever told her it was okay to fail. It was always about being perfect, making the family proud, being a symbol. Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably, and I wonder, what would have happened if she had just been allowed to be a teenager? I took a breath. My heart was racing. I'm not here to shame anyone. I just think we should be honest. Amy didn't just achieve all this on her own. She carried expectations that would have crushed most people. And she still rose. Silence. Heavy. Thick. I looked at Amy. Her eyes were glassy. Not angry. Not proud. Just full. I stepped away from the mic. And for a second, no one clapped. Then, someone did. Then another. And soon, the room erupted. Except for my mom. I felt like the entire room had shifted on its axis, gravity pulling at my chest as I clutched the edge of the podium. The applause still echoed in my ears, and I could see Amy's shoulders trembling with what looked like pride mixed with shock. My mother's eyes bore into me from the front row, a storm behind them. My heart hammered like a frantic bird trapped in a cage, wings beating against my ribs. I stepped away and found a folding chair against the back wall, my paper cup of punch abandoned on a nearby table. The chatter rose around me, but all I heard was the thunder of my own pulse. I could feel every drop of sweat tracing a cold path down my spine. For a moment, I thought I might collapse, but then I forced myself to breathe slowly, in and out, counting each second. People began to drift toward Amy, congratulating her, but a few glanced at me with curious, speculative smiles. I didn't know whether they admired my courage or pitied my audacity. I wanted to sink into the floor, disappear under those scuffed tiles, but I didn't. I stayed rooted to my spot, watching the crowd swirl around my sister like a galaxy of tiny lights. Amy finally broke away, threading her way through a group of teachers, her cap tassel bobbing like a beacon. She approached me, the pride in her eyes lighting up her face. She reached out and squeezed my arm. Her gesture was silent, but I heard her words clear as a bell. "Thank you." I nodded, my throat aching. I didn't trust myself to speak. My mother left her seat and strode toward us, her heels clicking on the gym floor. Every head turned as she passed, drawn by her presence. She stopped in front of Amy and me, her face calm but unreadable. I expected her to admonish me, to tell me I'd embarrassed the family, but instead she said only, "Better you than me." It was a small murmur, meant for Amy's ear. Amy blinked, surprise flickering across her face. I wanted to know what she meant, wanted to ask, but words caught in my throat. Instead, Amy slipped her arm through mine and guided me toward the refreshment table. We stood side by side, two silhouettes framed by the buzz of conversation, our shoulders almost touching. I raised my cup in a silent toast to her, to us, to everything unspoken between us. She lifted her own cup and clinked it gently against mine. "Hey," she said quietly, so no one else could hear. "You did good." I shrugged, trying to look nonchalant, but my hands trembled. "I just said some truth." She smiled, the kind that reached her eyes and made them shine like morning dew. "Your truth," she said. My family needed to hear it. I stared at the floor for a moment, then looked up at her. The lines around her mouth softened. In that instant, I saw her not as the perfect valedictorian, not as the golden daughter whose every achievement reflected on our family name, but as my sister, someone who carried burdens she never asked for, someone who needed someone to remind her that she was allowed to be human. Across the room, Dad stood talking to Pastor Morris. I caught his eye, and for a second, I feared the worst. But instead of anger, I saw something like respect, paternal pride that had tempered over the years into a quiet acceptance. He nodded at me, and I nodded back. It was enough. As the reception wound down, people began to drift away, hugging Amy, taking last photos, gathering their things. The gym lights flickered overhead, and the faint hum of the air conditioning reminded me of the late afternoon heat outside. Amy and I walked toward the door together, footsteps echoing on the polished floor. We paused at the threshold, the cool evening air drifting in to meet us. "I'm proud of you," she said again, louder this time, so my parents could hear. My mother, just behind us, stiffened, then allowed the slightest curve to her lips. It was the first real smile I'd seen from her all night. My stomach twisted with nerves and relief. I opened my mouth to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a thank you, but the words seemed too small for the moment. Instead, I took a breath, feeling the tension melt out of my shoulders, and offered her my arm. She took it, and we stepped outside together. The parking lot was nearly empty, the asphalt gleaming where it caught the streetlights. My dad's old sedan sat waiting at the curb. Amy reached into her gown pocket and pulled out a crumpled tissue, dabbing at her eyes. I handed her a water bottle. She drank slowly, then handed it back. "I've got one more surprise for you," she said, her eyes dancing. She leaned in and whispered something that made my heart lift so high it felt weightless. I laughed, a genuine, deep laugh that vibrated in my chest. I hadn't laughed like that in years. The sound echoed in the night, and for the first time, I felt like maybe I had stepped out from under someone else's shadow and found my own place in the world. Mom came around the car, opening the passenger door for Amy. She hesitated when she saw me standing there, but then she opened the rear door without a word. I slid in, the leather seats cool beneath me, and felt the car shift as Dad slid behind the wheel. As we pulled away, the bright high school lights receded in the distance. The radio played softly, a slow song I didn't recognize. I stared out the back window at the empty lot, the crisp night air rustling the treetops, and realized that something fundamental had changed tonight. I had spoken up, I had risked humiliation, and I had found that truth could be more powerful than silence. My sister looked at me in the rearview mirror, her smile warm and real. My mother sat between us, silent but not unyielding. My father drove on, his hand steady on the wheel, and I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. No more whispers, no more shadows, just the hard, honest light of who we were. We had reached the next chapter. I didn't know how it would unfold, but for the first time, I couldn't wait to find out. I climbed out of the car and felt the cool night air wrap around me like a promise. Standing there under the street lamp's glow, I watched my family file in silently after me. My sister carried her gown in one hand and her diploma in the other, her cap dangling at her side. Mom followed with a strange mixture of pride and reservation painted on her face, her posture stiff but not unyielding. Dad remained behind the wheel, waiting for us to make the first move. I realized just how much had shifted between us all in the last few hours. My voice, trembling with nerves, had managed to crack open old wounds and forge new connections I hadn't dared imagine. Amy caught my eye as she smoothed her hair back from her face. She smiled, that genuine smile that lit up her whole expression, the one she'd held back for so long under the weight of expectations. My heart swelled. I felt like I was standing on a threshold, about to step into uncharted territory. The air smelled of cut grass and late spring flowers from the nearby park. The street was empty except for a lone dog walker in the distance, the rhythmic tapping of his shoes on the pavement blending with the hum of distant traffic. I turned to my mother and saw her eyes soften for the first time since I can remember. She took a deep breath, as if deciding whether to release a lifelong held secret. My pulse raced, waiting for whatever came next. Amy linked her arm through mine, grounding me in the moment. I was no longer just a shadow beside my golden sister. I felt real, present, capable of owning my story. Dad stepped out of the car then, stretching his legs and shading his eyes against the lamp's glare. He looked at me, this time not with the reserved acceptance I'd seen earlier, but with something like affection. He ruffled my hair the way he used to when I was a kid who had just fallen off his bike. The memory hit me like a wave. I closed my eyes, savoring the warmth of that simple act. And when I opened them again, I knew things would never be the same. Without a word spoken, we fell into step toward home, our shadows long on the pavement, stretching ahead of us into the unknown. Walking back up our driveway, the house looked different under the moonlight. Windows reflected the silver of the night, and I could hear the faint tick of a clock inside. Each of us moved slower than usual, reluctant to break the fragile peace that hung between us now. I realized that tonight had been less about graduation and more about reclaiming pieces of ourselves we'd lost to obligation. Amy paused before the front door and turned to face me and Mom, her voice steady and soft. She said, "I'm sorry I never spoke up. I know how hard it's been for you too." I felt heat in my cheeks, both from the compliment and from the sudden swell of emotion. Mom's eyes glistened, and I saw a crack in her armor. She reached out, hesitated, then pulled Amy into a hug. It was the kind of hug I'd only ever seen in movies, the kind that leaves you gasping for air. But in that moment, air never felt more plentiful. Dad unlocked the door and opened it for us, then stepped aside with a little bow that made us all laugh. We filed into the living room, where the clock ticked loudly in the silence. I looked around at the faded family photos on the wall, at the bookshelf lined with Mom's favorite novels and Dad's well-worn baseball gloves. Everything felt warmer, more alive. I took a seat on the couch, feeling the cushions give beneath me as I sank in. Amy sat beside me, pressing her shoulder against mine, and Mom took a chair facing us. Dad grabbed 2 glasses, filled them with water, and passed one to each of us. We sat there, 4 figures bathed in soft lamplight, and for the first time, we let ourselves breathe together. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Mom cleared her throat and said quietly, "You both surprised me tonight. I saw something beyond what I thought I knew about you." That was all she said, but it meant everything. I nodded, feeling tears prick the corners of my eyes. Amy reached over and squeezed my hand. Dad leaned back, resting his arm on the couch's back, his eyes soft. We didn't need words to fill the room anymore. The walls that had held us apart were gone, replaced by this fragile new bond. I realized as I sat there that life was never going to be perfect. There would be mistakes, hurt feelings, and plenty of uncertainty. But I also knew we'd found something stronger than fear, honesty. The moment I spoke at that reception, I gave myself permission to be seen. And in turn, I gave my family permission to do the same. Amy's graduation would long be remembered not just for her speech, but for mine as well. It was the night we stopped whispering warnings and started speaking truths. I thought about the road ahead, college choices, job interviews, new relationships, all the unknowns that awaited us. But for the first time, I felt ready to face them. Whatever came next, we'd face it as a family, unafraid to admit when we were breaking, and strong enough to rebuild. I lifted my glass in a silent toast to that. Amy followed my lead, then Mom and Dad joined in, and in that moment, the 4 of us were connected by more than blood. We were united by the courage to speak, to listen, and to grow. And I knew without a doubt that this was only the beginning.